The tech bros are trying to take away your humanity, but you're not a machine. Let's talk about what it means to live like a human in this high-tech world. This is Analogish, and I'm your host, Becky Mollenkamp. Today, I am joined by Andria Singletary, the host of Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs, your own podcast, and also a podcast strategist who helps women entrepreneurs step into their evergreen marketing era through podcasting. Thanks for being here, Andria.
Thank you for having me.
If you're not a business owner, this episode may not be as relevant for you, but Andria, tell me a little bit about your business background and how your relationship with social media has changed from when you first started business to now.
I started my business back in October 2021. At the time, I had a 1-year-old and I was pregnant with my second child. But at that time, I was like working as a virtual assistant and my son was in preschool full time. And so I was able to show up on social media. So I was doing the Instagram thing, the Facebook thing, all of that. And those are actually my main marketing platforms, especially because, like, when you first start your business, you're told you need to be on social media. It needs to be a part of your marketing strategy and everything. And so I went that route. And it worked fine during that time. And then my daughter was born, and that shifted everything. Now I'm this mom of two under two, and my son, we switched him to part time. So he was home more. I had this newborn, and trying to show up on social media just wasn't realistic for me. And so, because I wasn't able to show up as like frequently as I was before, it impacted me getting leads and signing clients for my business. And so I realized that I needed to shift my marketing. And it was kind of scary because, again, like it's kind of drilled into us that we have to be on social media, that it needs to be like part of our visibility and different things like that. But it was like, I can't commit to it like I used to. And if I'm only prioritizing that, like my business isn't going to grow the way that I need it to. And so that's when I started to kind of like shift my relationship with social media and looking at, what other options do I have outside of social media? Like, what are some sustainable ways that I can actually, show up, be visible, connect with potential clients that doesn't require me to be on all the time?
There's so many places that we can be, and there's only so many hours in the day. So what did that start to look like for you, how you were feeling about your relationship with social media at the time you decided I need to rethink this business strategy?
Honestly, it was just like not feeling fully present with my kids. So I found myself like constantly on my phone trying to, post this piece of content, engage with, my followers and different things like that. And it's like I had this aha moment where it's like, well, your kids are only going to be this age for so long, and you're missing out on so much because you're pouring so much time into being on social media to market your business and everything. And I was like, it's not worth it. Like, my kids are more important than this business. And so that was like really what forced me to start to shift things because I didn't want to miss those moments. I didn't want them to view me as always being on my phone, always working and different things like that. And so that really forced me to change things.
I think so many people can relate to the feeling of like, I've got to make a change here. And yet still having that nagging voice that says, but if you don't show up, you won't get any clients, you won't have a business, you're going to be broke, all of those thoughts that come up. So how did you deal with that and starting to figure out what it would look like? Because I'm sure those thoughts were real. Like you said, that was where a lot of your leads were coming from. What were your fears about reducing social media and what were you planning to do instead?
So my fears were that like I would be forgotten, or it would be hard for me to like get out there, or like I'm gonna have to like completely rebuild my audience and different things like that. And so I started gradually shifting away from social media. So not completely stepping away, but like showing up less. And I started looking at other ways I could get out there where I could do it more so on my own time. I didn't have to show up at such like a high frequency. And so I started exploring doing collaborations. So like guesting on other people's podcasts, doing speaking engagements. So at like virtual summits and different things like that. And then I also decided to launch my own podcast. I actually launched it October 2022. So I think my daughter was like about 6 months old. I always like knew the power of having long form content. I mean, I think that I kind of like talked myself initially out of doing it because I'm like, do I really have the time or energy to pour into managing my own podcast and everything? Especially at that time, I had pivoted into podcast production. So I was like running other clients' podcasts. But I'm like, you know what? I can build simple systems. I can set this up in a way that's sustainable for me, and so I started leaning into those avenues, especially like with the podcast. And that became a great way for me to stay visible without having to show up daily. So I made sure to learn, SEO early on and incorporating that so that people could easily find my content, and, really speaking on, the topics that my ideal clients, are looking for that are relevant to them and everything. And so that really helped me stop relying so much on social media, and also to still, like I said, be visible, get leads, and sign clients without having to be on all the time.
When you started to reduce your social media usage before you were implementing or while you were implementing some of these other longer form content, probably longer term strategies than that immediate sort of dopamine hit plus the immediate reaction of social media. As you started to scale back on social media, what did you notice? Were you like feeling forgotten? Were you surprised by how much you weren't missing it or how much it didn't seem like you were missing out on things? What was the immediate feeling after you started to scale back?
I felt relief, like, I no longer felt that pressure to have to be on, to, produce so much content and everything. I think I ended up taking, like, a month or 2 break from posting on Instagram, and, like, I didn't freak out about it or anything like that, but I also noticed that I was starting to attract, more ready to invest clients through my podcast. So people who already knew they were ready to work with me, they were ready to move forward. And I noticed that like a lot of the back and forth, especially like on discovery calls, it was more so like, okay, I just want to make sure you are who you say you are. Like, I already know I want to work with you. And so it was just a completely different experience, but also just very like affirming and kind of building my confidence. Like, okay, this is the right direction for me. This is something sustainable that I can realistically commit to. And it's not, slowing my business growth. It's not impacting my income or anything like that.
Yeah. The higher quality leads thing is interesting. So, when you talk to me about what you do now, you're still using social media, but less so, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. And
Yes.
really, you're focusing on is the podcast, and then from that content, are you creating blogs and newsletters? Is that kind of how it all plays together?
So I my podcast, it serves like as multiple steps in my funnel. So I do use it for lead generation. I also nurture my current audience. So like I'll drive my email list to the podcast. I will share about like my latest episodes on threads and like drive people to the podcast that way. And then I also sell my offers on the podcast. But I do use it to, repurpose content. So like I will pretty I don't want to say pretty active, but like I do post on threads and I will pull directly from like a podcast episode, something like a juicy line that I say, like breaking down like a certain strategy or something, I will share that on threads. As far as like my email, I try to create like different content for my email versus the podcast. Just so I treat like my email list kind of like, a group chat. Like this is the VIP exclusive area. This is where I share like more behind the scenes and the raw and real and different things like that to kind of just create this exclusive experience and everything. but I still will pull ideas from, a podcast episode, and maybe I dive deeper on a specific, concept or different things like that. But I do like repurpose the podcast episodes for like blog posts and different things. And it makes it a lot easier creating more content. But again, it's not like I'm showing up everywhere, doing all the things and different things like that. It makes the whole content creation process a lot easier. I'm not active at all really on Instagram. It's like a dead zone over there, which I'm at peace with. Instagram is not the platform for me. But yeah, always start with planning like my podcast content first and then kind of branch out from there.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned about the volume of content or the longer form content with a podcast and then, blogging and newsletters, because I do think some people might hear that and think, well, that doesn't feel like much of a trade off to say I'm going to spend
Yeah.
less time on social media, but I'm going to do all this other content. It feels like as much or more work. So, is that true or is it not true for you? And if it's not, what keeps it from feeling the same level of overwhelm as social media?
So, one, I'm not creating daily podcast episodes. I publish a weekly episode. I batch record my episodes, and I don't do video for my podcast. I think a lot of times when people think about a podcast, they think there has to be the video component too, and it doesn't. Like audio only is still thriving. And so I literally record my episodes on my phone. I sit in my walk in closet, record my episodes, batch them out that way. And so it's not a long, in depth process. Even with my editing, I do a minimal editing. I'm not trying to make it sound like I am recording in, this high quality studio. The audio is clear, people can hear me good, but it's like I'm keeping it simple. I'm a mom, soon to be a mom of 3. Like, I don't have the time to do the full production and stuff like that. When it comes to blogging, I only do 1 blog a month, and that works really well for me. But I make sure that the content I'm creating is quality content, meaning I am answering the specific questions that I know my ideal clients are searching Google for, searching the podcast listening apps for. And I think that's where people kind of make their mistake when they do branch into long form content. Because with the short form content, we do have to produce more. We do have to show up multiple times a week. And so we're like
Or
churning
day?
out, yeah, or day, yeah. And so we're churning out all these different things, and it's not always the highest quality content. So with long form content, if you are really producing that quality content, like that type of content that's going to shift people's perspective, you're saying, the quiet thing out loud that's really going to attract your people. You see that difference in that you're not having to produce as much, but also too, let's talk about the longevity of long form content. I have people discover, episodes I published weeks, months, even years ago, and they discover my podcast and then they go on this binging spree. And then it's like they trust me. They're like, okay, this is the person I need to hire. And this is without me necessarily producing a new episode. So I think if you look at the trade off and how literally this type of content sustains you long term, it may feel like a little bit work, especially like to launch the podcast initially and everything. But once you're building up, that content, that library of content, and then you're having people discover it. And literally by the time they book a discovery call with you, they already know they're ready to work with you. It's worth it. So I see it as not being as much work because I still have older content that's working for me. Like Instagram could never do that. People don't go back to your, content you published weeks, months, years ago. Like it's forgotten, it's buried. But
Well,
with
some
your
of it
pod
literally goes away when you're talking about
yeah, your
stories and things.
stories. Yeah, but like with your podcast episodes, with your blog posts, that people can find the older content and it still can work for you.
Yeah, blogging I find especially, but I think podcasting is similar because I have a show that I haven't put a new episode out in a year. And it still has people finding it both on YouTube and on listening platforms where I'm like, where are these people coming from? Because I haven't put any content out there. And blogging, I mean, I will have years old posts that will
Mhm.
have a sudden surge in traffic because it happens to relate to something that's going on in the world or something that is kind of heightened interest at the moment or whatever. So it's always amazing. What I hear you saying is I'm focused on quality more than quantity, where social media tends to be, I think, a lot more about quantity than necessarily quality. And
Yeah.
so how does it feel also? Because, I love to talk about the feelings of all of this because part of it is just, I don't want to feel so disconnected. I don't want to feel so rushed. I don't want to feel so, all the things that social media makes us feel like
Yeah.
crappy. Like, and do you feel different in creating that kind of content that you're creating now versus what you were creating before?
Yeah, it honestly lights me up is because you get to go so much deeper on a topic and you know that you're creating content that specifically answers people's questions, that, highlights your expertise, positions you as this authority and everything. And I love the feeling of recording podcast episodes. Like I act like I'm like sending voice notes to clients and different things like that. And really just incorporating like my personality and everything. And it's like you don't have that limit. You don't have to worry about people's quote unquote attention span and different things like that. And I'm more of a like long-winded person. So I love to be able to have that freedom with my podcast content, with my blog content and everything. Like I recently wrote a blog post on, choosing the right podcast hosting platform, as a business owner. And I was able to go in depth and like really answer specific questions. And I look at it as like I'm creating this resource for someone who, when they are ready to decide to launch their podcast, they can come to this blog post and they can be able to know exactly what they should be looking for in a podcast hosting platform, what questions they should be asking and different things like that. And so it just feels good to be able to create this type of content that I know it's going to help people not just today, but even a year from now, 2 years from now, and everything. And so I think of like that longer term impact, or even kind of like thinking of, in a sense, creating a legacy through this content. Like it has so much more depth and it can help people, like I said, years from now. And so I think that feeling really lights you up because with social media, you don't necessarily get that. Like, it's cool, yeah, people see the content, but then like a week goes by and that really powerful piece of content, everybody forgot about it, or no
A
one else
week
is
is
really
a
gonna
long
see
that's a
it.
long time
I
for
know,
social
it's
media.
more like 48 hours, but, and so it's like that difference is like, I'm creating this content for a purpose, and I know that people will see it, but also it's not just relevant for today. Like, people can see it weeks, months, and years from now, and so I think that really just, like, lights me up and makes me feel really good about the content I'm creating.
Well, and talk about feelings and being lit up. I think one of the things that keeps people hooked onto social media, quite literally, like hooked as in it's almost like a drug, is the dopamine hit that they get, right? Because while it may not have that longevity, it has this instantaneous sort of feeling to it where I can put something out and I'll probably get likes right away. I'll get comments right away, right? You get that like immediate kind of hit. And it's obviously designed that way to
Mm.
make us start to crave and want more of that. But do you like what's your relationship with dopamine right now in your business? Are you noticing or did you, especially then, did you feel some of that withdrawal? Do you still sometimes find yourself craving that a bit? Are you finding it in different ways? Because I think that's a very real part of the social media experience and reason that so many people sort of stay hooked even when they want to disentangle themselves.
Yeah, so I think for me, what switched my perspective, like when it came to like the whole dopamine hits for social media, is like likes and comments don't pay my bills. That does not guarantee someone is going to become a client. Now, if they DM'd me after like seeing my post and started inquiring about my offers, then yeah, like that felt really good. And so I think just shifting your perspective around it, that really helps to kind of like be like, well, okay, I feel good for what, 30 seconds, but it's not actually doing anything to grow my business. But I do still get those quote unquote dopamine hits like with my long form content. So having someone, message me about like one of my podcast episodes and having a full on discussion about it, like how much they enjoyed it, what they learned from it. Even having people share my podcast episodes. So I'll get the tags on social media, like saying, like somebody just kind of like writing their review about a specific episode. So you still can get that. The dopamine hits like through your long form content. But I have found that like when those situations happen, it usually leads to like a deeper conversation in which they end up inquiring about working with you. And so for me, it's like that's a better feeling. Like when it leads to someone asking, like, hey, is this offer the right offer for me? I heard you talk about it on your podcast. This is what I'm currently going through. Would this offer help solve that problem? That is like such like a best dopamine hit in my opinion.
Yeah, the ding of a notification is not nearly as exciting as the cha-ching of an actual client. So I appreciate that for sure. And also just the depth of conversation that you can
Mhm.
have or that it creates. And you've kind of mentioned the know like trust part of marketing and of running a business, and that in your experience, this longer form content and most particularly I think the podcast is helping with creating that, which actually creates much warmer leads and shortens that. Although it can be a longer time, right,
Mm.
than just throwing out a post about an offer, but that post falls on dead, it dies within 24 hours. Nobody sees it because the algorithms don't like when you're promoting and all of that. So it may be more immediate, but and it might take longer to produce podcast episodes for people to hear enough of them for them to take action. But when they do take action, what I'm hearing is they're way more primed. They're ready to go. These are quality leads. What is it do you think about podcasting? And I mean, I feel like I kind of know the answer because I love podcasting too. But for people who are maybe not don't have a podcast in their business or aren't using longer form content in other ways, what do you think is about that gives it more of that no like trust than just social media can do?
It's like you create this relationship with the host essentially. So like even just thinking about podcasts I listen to, I like just love the host personality. I feel connected to them. I feel like I really know them. And especially like when I listen to more like quote unquote business podcasts. So like if I come, up against a problem that maybe they did a podcast episode on, it's like they pop into my head. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try out that strategy they said on the podcast. And so it really just builds this type of relationship, but also too like if you think about it, when we listen to podcasts, we listen when we're driving, we listen when we're doing laundry, going on a walk. And so you literally become a part of someone's daily routine. And so that's also part of that relationship building process. Like with social media, I'm not sitting and waiting for my favorite, business owner, like, oh, I can't wait to see what they post on Instagram. I'm not even thinking about that. But I know each week they're going to have a new podcast episode. I'm looking forward to it. I'm thinking about, ooh, what are they going to talk about this week? Like, how are they going to get my life together this week and stuff like that? And so you really do build this relationship. And I know people will say things like, oh, but it's a one sided conversation. Not necessarily. Like you feel like you really get to know that person there, and especially if they're really tuned in with their audience and they're saying the things that their audience is thinking and feeling, that builds so much trust. You're like, wow, this person really sees me. They get me. They understand what I'm going through. And so that's going to build that trust a lot quicker. And when they start talking about their offer, you're more likely to convert into that offer because you feel like they already know you. You feel like they fully understand what your problem is and that they can truly help you solve it. And just with social media, because it's like such bite-sized pieces, it's a lot harder to get that compared to, podcasts.
Yeah, we are literally in your head right now, listener, more than likely, or very near it if you have. But for people who put, like, their earbuds in their ears, it's like we are in your head, and it feels so intimate because of that, like and I know when I listen to podcasts, it's in my head, I'm interacting, even if they don't hear my side of
Yeah.
the conversation, I'm thinking all sorts of things about what they're saying, right? And so I'm having a conversation of sorts with them, so I completely agree with you, and it's just such an intimate experience that at that point, you really do feel like even if they don't know you, you feel like you know them, and you feel like they know you, even if they don't, so I totally agree in a way. Social media is just very flat. It's really
Yeah.
flat, right? And even when we see things, it's often so curated that it doesn't feel real. And I love what you were saying about how you do your podcast, that it's more raw, right? It's not highly you don't have all the fancy lighting and that you're not even doing video and you're like, you're keeping it really low key. And I think that that gives people an even more intimate feeling, I suspect, than a highly polished show that starts to again sort of separate you from the listener. But I am curious to do that. You have to be willing to let go of some perfectionism stuff. You have to be willing to be a little bit vulnerable and saying, "Hey, this episode's not perfect and I did make a mistake," or whatever, and still put it out there. How did you get to the place of being, because with social media, you can even edit after you post. Certainly you edit before you post, and then now you can even, up to a certain amount of time after, go back and fix mistakes. So how
Yeah.
did you get past that feeling of people are going to judge me, or it's not good enough, or is this too raw? How do you deal with the perfectionism stuff?
It was so funny. I think it was like about a year, like a little over a year ago. So, it was like Christmas and we had all our kids' gifts in the closet. And so normally like I would go in the closet to record and I would have like my microphone set up and everything like that. And I couldn't. And so like trying to set up the microphone somewhere else, because at this time we were living in an apartment too. It just wasn't working. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have to record on my phone. And so I did it that one time and, like, just kinda stuck with it, and the feedback that I got from my listeners would just confirm that it was the right move to make, even though I didn't intentionally do it, and it was just more so, like, they loved just, like, the openness. Because I even said, like, "You know what? I'm recording these episodes on my phone. If the audio quality is bad, just bear with me." But it also just create more of a relaxed feeling for me. So like I was actually sitting in the middle of my bed recording these episodes and everything. And it really just kind of shifted my perspective around things, especially like as someone who has like the podcast production background, it's like drilled in us like you need to have, a quality microphone and you make sure your audio sounds so good, all this stuff. And it kind of like forced me to try out the other side of things. And I'm like, this makes it a lot easier to get started because I see like a lot of times people delay starting their podcast because they're like, oh, I got to figure out the tech. And, it becomes this complicated thing where it's like, you know what, that's just too overwhelming. I'm not going to do it. And so being able to kind of like be in that position where I'm recording on my phone and just feeling how relaxed I felt, especially like because I use Voxer a lot with my clients, and it literally felt like I was Voxering a client. And so that really just kind of like helped me move away from the whole perfectionism aspect. And I honestly feel like it really helped me to find my voice when it came to my podcast. And it just, like I said, it just kind of like took the weight off of like trying to show up at like a certain way, especially like as a podcast strategist, people are looking for you to do things a certain way, be a certain way. And so now I'm kind of like that podcast strategist where I'm like, you know what, let's throw the rules out and let's set this up in a way where it truly works for you, that makes sense for you. And so, yeah, I think going through that whole experience really helped me move away from the perfectionism and to really just show up as like my true authentic self instead of trying to be like overly polished and everything. Cause I even tell people, I'm like, don't listen to like my older episodes, like the first 150, like, let's just ignore those.
I
Cause they
think
were
all of
just
us
so
would say that.
overly edited and like overly polished. And it's like, no, that's not who I am. Like, I'm a hot mess and it's okay.
Well, because the people who are also hot messes or people who want to work with somebody who they feel like they can have a real conversation with, they appreciate that, right? So
Yeah.
it's great to show up that way. And I think when we get the positive feedback, it really helps in saying, okay, I can do this. One thing we haven't talked about that I think is really important as far as the benefits of not relying so much on social media for marketing in your business and looking at other ways of approaching marketing is ownership. Who owns your content, right? So just talk a little bit about that piece and what maybe if it played any kind of role in your decision, or at least now as you think about content, what that how that affects your decisions on where you're sharing.
Yeah, so I think like one of the biggest things, and we've seen this with a lot of like, especially big name business owners and creators and stuff on social media, is like people getting locked out of their account or having their account hacked and them losing access. Even like the whole censorship piece, especially we've been seeing that, I feel like even much more heavily within the last couple of years or so. And so for me, I wanted a platform where I had the freedom to say the things that I wanted to say without worrying about, like, my content not being pushed out or being told that goes against community standards and stuff like that. And so I think that is something that's very important to consider, like, when you are deciding on, like, which platforms you're gonna show up on for your business. While, like, social media, like I said, it's easier to get started, different things like that. The reality is that you can lose access to your followers. You can lose access to your account and everything. And so that's why, like, when you hear people say, like, don't build your business on social media, it's like, don't do it, because if that's the only way you have to connect with your people and you lose access today, you're literally gonna have to start over. And
Yeah.
that sucks.
Yeah, we've seen platforms, TikTok being most recent, where there was a mass exodus because of
Yeah.
political issues and ownership issues and things that are well outside of your control as a creator.
Yeah.
And if you suddenly have your audience flee from a platform, or that platform just is either closes down or it's no longer the cool platform, and you build up all this audience there, you see people are like, that was my whole livelihood. And that's really scary. Something like a podcast, you own that content. You can take it anywhere, your email list, your website,
Yeah,
your blog.
and I will even say, like, with your email list too, make sure you're exporting your list
Yes,
every
ma'am.
month, because you don't know, like, we've heard of these different platforms shutting down and whatnot, and it's like, sometimes they don't even give you much of a warning, so at least if you export your, email list each week, you can always go to a different email marketing platform if you need to. But, like, with your long form content, especially, like, your podcast, we don't have anyone, like, coming to shut down our podcast or, not pushing out our content because we're speaking on certain topics. You have that freedom of speech. And so I think, like, really focusing on prioritizing that long form content is so important as a business owner, especially if you wanna have that longevity in your business.
Yeah, the longevity is key, and like you said, there's the quality of the leads, the quality of the content, all of that. So now let's go where you are now. You still use threads. I think you still are on a couple of platforms. You use some of them to a much lesser degree. What is your relationship with technology inside your business now? How much of your time does it take up? How does it feel? And how does that compare to where you were 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I've found that I don't really go on, like, for instance, Instagram really at all. Like, unless someone sends me a DM or I'm tagged or something, I kind of forget the platform exists. And then with Threads, I mostly like to engage on other people's content. And one of the things I do like about Threads is that it's more conversational. So it's not so much creating graphics, doing videos, and different things like that. And I like to use it as a way to drive people to my podcast. And so I'll take maybe, probably about 30, 45 minutes a week where I'll just go through and like search specifically podcast threads to see like what questions people are asking around podcasting. And if I have a podcast episode or a blog post on it, I'll just drop the link and say, hey, I actually talk about this in this episode, or I have a whole blog on this topic if you want to check it out. And that's kind of like the extent to what I do. Like, I will like post on threads, but I can like show up on threads and then I will go months without posting. Like, there's no in between. And it's because it's not a main part of my marketing and sales strategy. It's something that, like, if I'm feeling it, I'll do it. If not, not the end of the world. And so I do focus my efforts on, like I said, my podcast, my email list, and blogging. I am doing collaborations, not as much right now since I'm in the third trimester of my pregnancy. But collaborations were a big part of my visibility strategy. And it's always fun, meeting and networking with other business owners and everything like that. But yeah, social media, it's not a big part of my business. Like, I can literally fall off the face of the earth when it comes to social media and my business will be okay.
That right there is probably what all business owners listening, especially to a podcast like this, are thinking they would love to have, right? I want to be
Yeah.
able to say, if I never show up on social media again, I will be okay. My business will be okay. That whole fear of being forgotten thing won't be true for me. And so it is possible. We just have to believe in it. And I know that your podcast is called Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs. And that idea of evergreen is exactly what you're talking about. It's the kind of marketing efforts that live on beyond the 5-minute algorithm,
Mhm.
feed. So I'm sure that you're sharing a lot of this kind of stuff there as well. So people who are
Yes.
interested, go listen. I'll link to it in the show notes or the description. You can find Evergreen Marketing Era for Women Entrepreneurs so you can get more of these kinds of tips. Anything else that you want to share that we didn't get to today?
I will say, like, if you're thinking about starting a podcast and maybe you're hesitant because you're wondering, will it actually work for me? Is this the right platform for me and everything like that? I will say start with podcast guesting. And this is something I recommend to any and everyone who's thinking about starting a podcast. Just because I love podcasting does not mean you're going to love it. And so guest on other people's podcasts and see if you actually like being behind the microphone. And then from there, you can branch out and decide, if you want to start a podcast. But a podcast isn't your only option for long form content. You have blogging. If you do enjoy doing video, you have YouTube, but you do have other options. And so I say, like, if you can guest on someone else's podcast first, just to kind of get the feel for what it's like, and just to make sure you actually enjoy creating content in this format, do that first.
The point isn't necessarily everyone go start a podcast, although I think as the person who runs the Feminist Podcasters Collective, I love that idea. Come join us in the podcast collective. I think the point is social media is not the kind of content that really ultimately supports most people's business. And even if it does, it's precarious because it could be gone tomorrow. That platform may not be there. You don't own that. And that stuff is short lived. The point is find the way that you like to create, like you said, long form content, stuff that is evergreen, that can exist long, years down the line from now and be servicing your business while you're sleeping so that that stuff is out there and that you're not having to always be on. And I'm guessing now you feel like you're not always on. And so that's got to
Yes.
feel better. Thank you, Andrea, for being here. I really appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you so much for
And
having me.
you don't use social media much, but I will link to Threads so people can find you there. But obviously the podcast, your website, and your newsletter will all be in the show notes for people to find you to connect with you. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Analogish. This episode is over, but the world is still out there. Go find it.